I'm Doug Spearman, and I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. at the height of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, early 1960s. I am an actor, a writer, producer, and activist, and I am on the board of the Equality California Institute. I'm also on the board governance committee and on the executive committee as a member at large.
Great, thank you. Black History Month means many things to different people. What does it mean to you?
Well, what does Black History Month mean to me? A chance to, that's a really loaded question for me, because I grew up in a time of such revolution based around color and ethnic identity in this country. When I was a kid, when I was about 6 years old, Martin Luther King was killed. And I was going to a school in the District of Columbia called Rudolph Elementary School. And I remember suddenly my father having to pick me up in the middle of the day and walking out of our school, and there was a National Guard. There were National Guard stationed around us. And there were soldiers everywhere. And it was frightening, and it was powerful, and it was change. And we don't always get easy things in this country because we're black, because of the history of being black in the United States. And when I think of Black History Month, it reminds me of that change and that struggle and what can come out of that. I mean, I wouldn't be sitting here if it hadn't been for the people that we honor during Black History Month. You know, I think of when I was in the 4th grade, they introduced it to my elementary school for the very first time. And you realize that, or at least for me, that things were possible, that people did stuff, that people changed, that I wouldn't be where I'm at if it weren't for those things that they did. And the bravery that inspires. You know, for me, Black History Month is about honoring the courage that it takes just to be black in this country. You know, to not settle into a comfortable existence. I mean, when I was born, you have to understand, my dad was born in Tupelo, Mississippi, in a slave cabin on the plantation where our family had been slaves for a couple hundred years. His grandmother was the daughter of the man that owned the plantation. And my mother, on the opposite end of the scale, was born in a really well-to-do family in Michigan, and her parents had gone to college. And her mother was so light she could pass for white. You know, so I was brought up, you know, in a place of comfort, and a lot of doors had already started to open. And like by the time I was born, you know, I had this the world was making a space for me that my parents could not have imagined. You know, that certainly didn't exist when they were kids. And, you know, so I had an opportunity to grow up in comfort and, in some cases, luxury. But when you look at people like, you know, Sojourner Truth or Harriet Tubman or Frederick Douglass, or, you know, when you read about cases like, you know, Plessy versus Gray, and, you know, you think about the courage it took to do what they did, the strength and the character and the indomitable will to do what was right. It sort of calls me out of my comfort zone. It calls to me to do something to honor the strength it took just to survive. I mean, you know, I remember watching, this is a long-winded answer, and I hope you don't mind. The movie Amistad is a great movie, only because I think it accurately represents the Middle Passage. And I remember thinking, at least two of my ancestors had to survive that, a man and a woman. And I think, and then my ancestors had to hang on for 400 years. Just hang on every day, hoping that it would get better, hoping that it would change, hoping that they would be free. And, you know, I live like a prince compared to some of my ancestors. So I have to honor that. I have to do something. I don't get to be complacent. I don't think as black people in this country yet we have the luxury of complacency.
Where do you see Black History Month going forward? Some people think are asked, why do we still have Black History Month? We now have a black president. There's been black folks that are on the Supreme Court. There are other achievements, secretaries of states, so on and so forth, governors, mayors. We've been very much a part of the political, the social fabric in ways that we may not have been able to imagine some 400 years ago. So where do you see Black History Month in another 50 years? What will it mean?
Well, let me put it to you this way. When there are no more robbers, no one's going to own a guard dog. Until we are actually completely included into the fabric of American history and society and culture, then we won't need it. But, I grew up with Black History Month from the time I was 8 years old. And then, I grew up in Maryland and Washington, D.C., which at the time was the largest center of black population in the United States next to Atlanta. I went to college in Indiana. I went to one of the largest universities in America, a public school, and I met kids from Indiana and Michigan and Illinois. Chicago was laid out and founded, Fort Chicago was laid out and founded by a black man. I went to school with people who had no idea. If you're not a black kid in a black school or in a school system that recognizes that there are enough black people, they're not going to teach you this. I found that out, that if you go to an all-white school and if you're living in an all-white world, you don't get the sense of accomplishment. You don't learn about our senses of our accomplishments. So I don't think it's going to go away. I mean, a reporter just after the State of the Union made that comment that, oh my God, for a minute there, I forgot that the president was black. Well, as long as there are comments like that and the thought process behind it, we're going to have Black History Month. It's important because there's so many kids that grow up without a sense of hope or accomplishment or the idea that we have added some value, because I think our idea of hero on an everyday, tangible level. I'm not talking about a sports hero or a music star that makes thousands and millions of dollars to command that kind of attention. Think of somebody like George Washington Carver, who was a scientist, who looked at a peanut and saw possibility. The fabric probably in this rug, the polyester in this rug is probably made out of synthesized peanut. The tarmac on every street in America bonds together because of George Washington Carver's ability to look at a peanut and see possibility. People wouldn't be alive today if it hadn't been for blood transfusions and the theory behind that developed by a black man. Railroad cars, stop signs, none of that would work without black people. And so many of us, and so many kids today, don't understand that we have always made a contribution and that we can continue to make a contribution. But then again, change happens, and it happens really fast and radical. Just as my life wasn't conceivable to my parents, the things that kids born 5, 10 years ago, what they're like when they're in their 30s, will be a world that I won't possibly be able to imagine, but I know I look for it with hope.